This is Black Unbounden, where we tell the stories the world doesn't see coming, the stories they never thought they'd hear, and the truths they never wanted to face. Today's story begins with a man named Zaire Thompkins, and if you saw him walking toward you on the street, you might think you already knew who he was, but you'd be wrong. He walked into the auditorium that morning with his sleeves rolled high, the ink on his arms spilling into the open air like pages from a history no one had asked to read. Tattoos snaking from wrist to shoulder in intricate lines and bold symbols, a skull etched across his knuckles, a verse from Proverbs etched down his forearm, the kind of markings that to him were memorials, promises, and survival, but to most in that room, they were warnings. His gait was steady, boots worn for miles, jeans frayed at the cuffs, his eyes hooded but sharp, scanning without flinching. He wasn't carrying fear. He was carrying history, and history, when carried openly, makes people uneasy. He could see it in their faces before he even reached the first row. The shift of posture, the tightening of shoulders, the whispered comments between people who didn't yet know his name but were already certain of his story. In those whispers, he wasn't a guest, he wasn't a leader, he wasn't a speaker. He was a stereotype, a threat. Security's gaze lingered on him a second too long. The organizers at the podium leaned toward one another, their voices low but urgent, eyes darting toward him. A professor with neatly parted silver hair and a bow tie stepped to the microphone, his tone unsure as though he was about to redirect someone who had lost his way. Are you lost, sir? This is the Youth Leadership Summit. You may be looking for the maintenance staff in trance. Zaire didn't slow his stride. He didn't answer. He walked down the aisle like the stage already belonged to him, like he had been here before in a dream, boots striking the floor with quiet certainty until he reached the steps. He didn't climb them right away. He stopped, 3 feet from the microphone, his presence filling the space without a word. The student volunteers exchanged uneasy glances. One boy leaned toward his friend with a smirk, elbowing him as he whispered, "This dude speaking today? Please." The arrogance in that please was familiar to Zaire. He had heard it in classrooms when teachers doubted him, in courtrooms when prosecutors dismissed him, in workplaces when managers underestimated him. The arrogance of people who believed that worth could be measured by appearance alone. What none of them knew, not the smirking student, not the professor clutching the podium, not the faculty watching from the sidelines, was that those tattoos told a story more complex and more human than any resume could capture. They didn't know that the name inked across his bicep was his brother's, taken from him by a bullet before his 18th birthday. They didn't know the verse from Proverbs was there because wisdom was the only thing standing between him and revenge. They didn't know that each piece of ink was a chapter, and together those chapters formed a testimony. The moderator's face changed when she glanced at the program and read the name printed there. Her lips moved silently around the words before she spoke them aloud, voice almost catching. Zaire Thompkins, keynote speaker, from prison to policy. The ripple that went through the audience was immediate and quiet, like a current shifting under still water. The whispers stopped. The smirks faltered, and Zaire stepped forward, taking the mic as though he'd been holding in his hands his entire life. You ever get looked at like a mistake before you even speak? His voice wasn't raised, but it carried through the auditorium, cutting the air cleanly. The room froze. I walked in here and watched some of y'all flinch. Some of y'all laugh. Some of y'all afraid. He let his eyes move slowly across the crowd. That's okay. I've been judged worse. Been treated worse. I've had handcuffs thrown on me for the way I looked, not for what I did. I've been told I don't belong in spaces just like this one. He tapped the mic gently. But I'm here anyway. He let the pause hang, heavy enough for everyone to feel it. My name is Zaire Thompkins. I'm 34 years old. And the first time I was arrested, I was 14. Silence tightened around the room. No father, no stability, Just a mother who worked 2 jobs and prayed I'd make it home. But the streets don't honor prayer. They prey on the ones who walk alone. I joined a gang. I was good with my hands. Real good. Not for art. For fights. Protection. Reputation. By 16, my skin started telling my story in ink. First one, my brother's name. Second, that verse from Proverbs. Because even then I knew I needed wisdom more than I needed blood on my hands. He lifted his arm so the front row could see. These tattoos, they're not decoration. They're memorials. They're warnings. They're promises to myself that I will never go back to that life. He took a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice softened, like he was remembering it all in real time. I was locked up at 19. 5 years. Armed robbery. And yeah, I did it. I was guilty. But prison wasn't where my story ended. It was where it started. I met Mr. Deschamps in there. Retired professor. Came every Wednesday. Said to me, "Boy, your brain is louder than your fists. Let's use it." He brought me books. Baldwin, Malcolm, Audre Lorde. Voices that cut through those walls like they weren't even there. He taught me to write. He taught me that policy can make prison walls taller or tear them down. He taught me I could either be a number or be a name. Zaire stepped closer to the edge of the stage, and his voice dropped into something that made people lean forward without realizing it. I chose my name. He told him how he got out and never looked back, how he worked 3 jobs at once, how he studied for his GED by flashlight after work, how he earned his community college degree and then won a full scholarship to Howard, how he stood in lecture halls at Yale getting his master's in public policy while still wearing the same ink the world had told him would ruin his chances. I walked into rooms where people like me were never meant to stand. And every time I rolled up my sleeves, those rooms went quiet, just like this one did. In the back, a student sniffled. Zaire didn't pause. You judged me when I walked in, just like they judged me in prison, just like they judged me in school, just like they judged me in City Hall. His lips curved in a faint smile. But those judgments didn't break me. They built me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. You want to know the full circle part? Last month, I stood in front of the city council and presented a bill to end juvenile solitary confinement in this state. You know what happened? It passed. Unanimously. And you know what I wore? These sleeves. You know what showed? These tattoos. Murmurs rolled through the seats. Because I don't hide where I came from. I honor it. My pain built my purpose. My scars shaped my voice. And if you can't see past the ink on my skin, you'll never understand the ink in my pen. He stepped back. For a heartbeat, the room was still, the kind of stillness that means people have been changed. Then came the applause, slow at first, then swelling until it filled the auditorium. The same professor who had asked if he was lost was now on his feet, clapping, his face both humbled and ashamed. Students crowded the stage afterward. Some cried openly. Some said nothing, just pressed his hand in silent gratitude. One young woman's voice shook as she said, "My brother's in juvenile. He thinks he's nothing. Can I show him this speech?" Zaire's answer was simple. Tell him he is something. And he always has been. 2 weeks later, the speech hit YouTube. 2 million views in 3 days. Comments poured in, "He spoke for me. This changed my life. I judge people like him never again." By the end of the month, Harvard invited him to speak. That same week, the governor's office called requesting a private meeting. And when Zaire walked into that marble-lined room, sleeves rolled high, tattoos visible, no suit, just truth, the governor stood, extended a hand, and said, "Mr. Thompkins, it's an honor to have you here." They had looked at his skin and thought they saw his soul. They saw ink and thought they saw crime. But What they really saw was their own prejudice reflected back at them. And when Zaire finally spoke, when he laid his truth bare, the room fell silent. Because nothing is louder than a voice that refuses to die, and nothing is more dangerous than a man who has turned his pain into power. Life lesson: never judge the depth of the soul by the cover it wears. Sometimes the one society tries to throw away come back to rebuild the very system that abandoned them. And sometimes the most powerful truths come from the mouths we once tried to silence, because redemption doesn't always show up in a suit and tie. Sometimes it walks in with ink on its arms and fire in its heart.